Good morning, students. Today we come to the fourth lecture of the lesson, The Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh. So, as I have told you, Khushwant Singh was a very notable Indian author. He was born on 2nd February 1915 and he passed away on 20th March 2014. In this story, Khushwant Singh narrates his connection, his relationship with his grandmother while trying to describe his grandmother as a wonderful person. So in this lesson, we will come up with many difficult terms and expressions, some of which as well might be very new to you. Okay, so we will begin with first of all explaining the difficult terms. So let's start. So as you can see this slide, there are some expressions which are very new. Okay, so I think there are 7 expressions. These expressions are found within the context, within the lesson. Don't worry, in my next slide, I will provide you an explanation of the expressions. So you can see here, the meaning of the expressions are being given. Let's come to the first expression. The thought was almost revolting. What the author means here is that it was difficult for him to believe that his grandmother was a young and beautiful woman once upon a time. The second expression, an expanse of pure white serenity. This means that the grandmother's nature, it was comparable, it could be compared to the quiet, peaceful, calm environment that breathes in the mountains, especially during the winter times. A turning point. This expression means a change or a changing phase in a person's life. Accepted her seclusion with resignation. It means that the grandmother had accepted her isolation from her grandson without any complaint. A veritable bedlam of chirrupings. It means or refers to the incoherent, noisy atmosphere created by the tiny sparrows. Again, the sixth expression, frivolous rebukes. It means the light-hearted comments, the scoldings of the grandmother directed towards the sparrows. She treated the sparrows as if they were human and they could listen to what she is saying. Last but not the least, the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum. Sagging means loosened and dilapidated means worn out. So the skins of the drum, the old drum that was used by the grandmother, it was a worn out one. Now let's come to the lesson, the first paragraph. He begins by writing, "My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. So she was no different." Khushwant Singh, the narrator, he is telling us that his grandmother was no different person. She was just like any other grandmother, very old. She had been old and wrinkled for the 20 years that I had known her. That means, how long does the author know his grandmother? 20 years. Okay, it is 20 years, and throughout these 20 years, he had seen her, he had known her as an old and wrinkled woman. What is the meaning of wrinkled? A person whose face is covered in wrinkles or fine lines, the folds that appear due to the sagging of skin. Next, people said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband, but that was hard to believe. So it was hard to believe for Khushwant Singh that she was a young and beautiful lady, though his neighbors or the people around, they used to come and they used to tell him that, you know what, your grandmother was such a beautiful woman. But Khushwant Singh, he could never believe. Why could he never believe? Because he had never seen his grandmother in that beautiful form. She was only an old lady to his eyes. My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. So also he had never seen his grandfather. Okay? His grandfather was dead long before he knew him. And what he saw was only a portrait. What is a portrait? A picture, a framed picture of the person. Right? And this picture of the grandfather, it was kept in the drawing room just above the mantelpiece. What is a mantelpiece now? A mantelpiece is actually a small concrete slab, a rack that is constructed above the fireplace. So the portrait, it hung on the wall just above the mantelpiece. And now he goes on to describe how his grandfather appeared in that photograph or in that portrait. Let us see what he says about that photograph. So he writes, he wore a big turban and loose-fitting clothes. The grandfather, as seen in the portrait, he was actually wearing a very, very big turban, okay, and he had loose-fitting clothes. Probably he was dressed up in the traditional Punjabi get-up, okay. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest, and he looked at least 100 years old. So he was also as old as his grandmother. Okay. His appearance was very shabby. He was wearing loose clothes, big turban on his head, and also he had a long white beard that covered most part of the chest. From his appearance, Khushwant Singh could make up that this man, he was, or rather he might have been 100 years old at that point of time when the photograph was being clicked. He did not look the sort of person, the kind of person, that means who would have a wife or children. So from the picture, the person or the grandfather did not appear to be a man who could be a husband or a father. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. He looked so old, extremely old, with white long beard, that he could not be thought of to be somebody's father or husband. Rather, he looked like a grandfather. Okay, a grandfather, that too one having lots and lots of grandchildren, maybe having great grandchildren as well. Right? So, just like his grandmother, the grandfather also looked very, very old. As for my grandmother, being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. The thought was almost revolting. We come up to the first expression. Remember, it was difficult for Khushwant Singh to believe that his grandmother was a beautiful lady. So you can see the portrait of his grandfather, something like this, wearing a big turban and loose fitting clothes. Yeah. So let's come to the next part. She often told us of games she used to play as a child that seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. So sometimes the grandmother, she would be reminded of her past, her childhood, seeing the small kids, and she would be telling them stories of the past, how as a child she used to play games. But Khushwant Singh, he could never believe that his grandmother was a child. Okay? Rather, he thought it to be very strange and very embarrassing that his grandmother was talking about such things. Okay, so most of the time, even her true stories of life, they were treated like imaginary stories or fables. I suppose you know the meaning of the word fables. Fables are nothing but stories having animal characters. Okay? She had always been short and fat and slightly bent. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. No, we were certain that she had always been as we had known her, old, so terribly old that she could not have grown older and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. So, for Khushwant Singh and his siblings, it was difficult to imagine that his grandmother had been a young lady. They had always seen their grandmother as a short, fat and slightly bent lady. She had probably she had a bent back. Okay, and her face, it was covered in a network of wrinkles, fine lines, fine lines moving from one end to another. It seemed as if her age has stopped. She could not grow older because she was already too old. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. Can you just notice the word beautiful lines? She could never have been pretty, but she was beautiful. That means from the top, externally she was never beautiful, but she was always kind and beautiful at the heart. She possessed a very noble heart, very compassionate heart, and that is why he writes, she hobbled about the house in spotless white, with one hand resting on the waist to balance her stoop. Stoop means her bent back, okay, and the other telling the beads of her rosary. Now in the picture, you can see there is a rosary. It's a beads of tulsi, or it's also called tulsi mala, right? And old people generally use those beads in order to chant their prayers. So this lady, the grandmother, she also used to carry a beads of rosary in one of her hands, while her other hand supported her waist while she hobbled. Hobbled means walked with difficulty. Probably she had some kind of pain in her knees. That is why she had to hobble about, right? So this is an idea of how the grandmother, looked like, appeared to be in her life. Her silver locks were scattered untidily over her pale, puckered face. Puckered means withered face. Pale and withered, pale, colorless, bloodless, and puckered means covered in folds and wrinkles. and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. Though the grandmother was a silent woman, her lips would be constantly moving. In what? In silent prayers, inaudible. Inaudible means silent. While her silver locks, silver locks, it is a reference to the white hair, the locks of hair, the curls of hair. They would be scattered untidily. Her hair was very messy. That is what it looks like. Right? Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains, an expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. So, yes, she was not beautiful outside, but then she was beautiful inside. Her nature was beautiful. The peaceful, the contented manner that she existed, her cool and compassionate nature, the tranquility, the silence, everything. It was similar to a winter landscape in the mountains. I suppose if you have visited the mountains during the winter time, it is generally snow-capped or it's covered in snow. There is no sight of any animal or bird or any kind of disturbance in that environment. It's such a peaceful and contented presence, right? So the grandmother, her nature, it was just like that white, snow-covered mountain landscape, as you will see in the next slide. This is the slide, and you can see how beautiful it appears, isn't it? The mountains, the snow, the blue sky above, and no sight of disturbance. So, here Khushwant Singh is using simile. I was talking about his use of figurative language. So, the line, she was like the winter landscape in the mountains. This is an example of simile. Okay? I suppose you have understood this part. Thank you very much.